This video is to provide examples for the addition and subtraction operations. It's to help develop meaning for the operations. The first one will be doing the joining, which is result unknown, change unknown, and start unknown. For example, Sandra had 8 pennies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. George gave her 4 more. How many pennies did Sandra have altogether? So George gave her 4 more. So now, counting in 4s, 4, 8, 12. Sandra has 12 pennies. That is with the result unknown, adding the first 8 pennies and then the 4, and then having the result. The next one is join, is change unknown. Sandra had 8 pennies, and George gave her some more. Now Sandra has 12 pennies. How many did George give her? Well, knowing that Sandra already has the 8 pennies to start with, and George gave her some more to add up to 12, that means that the change, the middle sum to add up to the result, is missing. So the missing result is 4. The next one is join, which is the start unknown. Sandra has some pennies, George gave her 4 more, and now Sandra has 12 pennies. How many pennies did Sandra have to begin with? This talks about the start unknown. So altogether, Sandra has 12 pennies and George gave her 4 pennies. Now, she had 12 pennies altogether. How many pennies did Sandra have to begin with? So if we take away George's 4, we have her original 8. So that does the join result unknown, join change unknown, and the join start unknown. The next one will be the separate result unknown. Sandra has 12 pennies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. She gave 4 pennies to George. So, bye-bye, 4 pennies to George. How many pennies does Sandra have now? Well, she had 12, she gave 4 to George, and now she has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is separate result unknown. Sandra has 12 pennies. She gave some to George, and now she has 8 pennies. How many did she give to George? So if she has 12, she gave some to George, she can count out the remaining 8, because that's the middle, the change. 8 plus something equals 12. So we're going to work out how many, after taking away 4, the ones that she gave some to George, how many is 8 pennies? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now we know that she gave George 4 pennies because she had 12 in total and she kept 8. Now, the separate start unknown is Sandra has some pennies. She gave 4 to George and now Sandra has 8 pennies left. How many did Sandra have to begin with? So she has all the pennies. She gave George 4. So there's 4, and she had 8 left. So after adding, there's 4 that she gave to George. Now she's got 8, so she needs to add them to the one she gave to George. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which equals 12 pennies altogether. That's why it's so important to know that the addition and subtraction is the same meaning. Now, there are 2 examples of addition problems. They are part whole problems, which involves 2 parts that are combined into one whole, and compare problems. The compare problems involve the comparison of 2 quantities. I'm going to do part whole, whole unknown, and part whole, part unknown, and then compare difference unknown, and compare larger unknown, and compare smaller unknown. Now, George has 4 pennies, so we're back to original 4 pennies, and 8 nickels. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many coins does he have? Not how much money, but how many coins. So he had 4 pennies and he had 8 nickels. So altogether he has 12 coins. Now, George has 12 coins and 8 of his coins are pennies. So, 8 of his coins are pennies. There's the original 4 and 8. So 8 of his coins are pennies. Oh, sorry. So George has 12 coins and 8 of his coins are pennies. And the rest are nickels. How many nickels does George have? So we know that he has 8 pennies and we need to make up the amount to 12. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now we know he has 4 nickels. Okay, so to compare difference unknown, we're going to do one of the examples and say George has 12 pennies. So we start with the original amount of pennies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And Sandra has 8 pennies. How many more pennies does George have than Sandra? Sandra's pennies are over here and she has 8. We know that George has 12 and Sandra has 8. So finding the compare difference unknown is finding out how many more George has than Sandra. So we know that 2 groups of 4 is 8 and that Sandra's stops there. So George has 4 more pennies than Sandra. Now doing the compare larger unknown, we're saying that Sandra has 4 fewer pennies than George and Sandra has 8 pennies. How many pennies does George have? If Sandra has 8 fewer or 8 less than George and Sandra has 8 pennies, which are right here, here's Sandra's pennies, she has 4 left, that means George has 12 because here's the original 8 and George has 4 more, whereas Sandra has 4 fewer. So Sandra has 8 and George has 12. The last one is compare smaller unknown. So George has 4 more pennies than Sandra. George has 12 pennies. How many pennies does Sandra have? So again, here's George in the problem. George has 12 pennies, but he has 4 more than Sandra. So again, looking at the collectiveness, 1, 2, 3, 4, Sandra has 8 and George has 12 pennies.